I'm Sarah Smith. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Bristol. It probably helps if I tell you a little bit about the background to the research. So there's been a growing interest among economists more generally in management practices and the role of management practices in explaining variation in kind of performance across different firms and kind of organisations. So we were interested in taking the survey and the methodology and applying it to higher education institutions. So there's a sort of widespread belief that universities are in some way different to other types of other types of organisations. So the expression herding cats has been used in relation to managing academics to sum up this idea that managing academics is sort of difficult and probably pointless. So what we were interested in doing was sort of taking this tried and tested methodology in measuring management practice in universities and in seeing whether this myth was true or whether in fact management practices did explain variation in performance across universities. So in terms of summarising the main findings of our paper, so I think one of the main contributions is to produce quantitative evidence on management practices across universities and university departments. So in our survey, we collected data from 250 departments and academic departments and HR departments. So that's kind of quite a large sample in terms of quantitative data. We have scores on different aspects of management. So operations, performance, targets and kind of talent management. So we'll look at different aspects of management. And then we can kind of see whether those management practice scores vary or can explain kind of variation in performance. And by performance, we kind of mean things that kind of universities care about, like teaching performance and research. So in terms of the main takeaways, so what we find is there's quite a lot of variation in terms of management practices across universities. So our survey captured kind of pretty much all types of organisations in the sector. So we had interviews with Russell Groups, with Oxford and Cambridge. We also have interviews with kind of some of the really new universities who've only just recently become universities and used to be higher education colleges. So we've got kind of, we document practices across a very wide number of institutions. We find that there are variations in management practices across those institutions. Typically, kind of the older, more established Russell Group universities do tend to score better. And most of that is linked to their kind of talent management. So by talent management, we mean their ability to sort of reward, retain the staff, motivate staff, as opposed to kind of the more sort of performance-related management. So we find variation in practices across universities, and we find that that variation in practices correlates with performance. So if you take kind of different measures of performance, whether it's a position in a league table or a kind of research-based metric or a teaching metric, there is kind of a relationship between how well the departments and institutions score in terms of these management practices and how well they do in terms of their outcomes. Yeah, so the kind of real takeaway messages from our research is that management practices do matter in terms of explaining or understanding some of the variation in performance across universities. So we can kind of dispel that managing academics is just like herding cats. In fact, academics are responsive to management practices in the same way as management practices work in other types of organisations. We particularly find the talent management bit is important. So in terms of which aspects of management matter, so the sort of performance measurement and the target, that's not what drives the relationship. It's really through the talent management. And we also find that within universities, departments that score best in terms of talent management also tend to kind of have decentralised management within the institution. So newer universities tend to centralise a lot of talent management processes, whereas what we find is it sort of works better if the sort of talent management is devolved to the departments, which makes sense because obviously there are different academic markets that operate for different disciplines, and it may well be that the heads of department are sort of more able to respond to the different needs of the different markets. So other kind of, we find that this sort of relationship matters for all different types of universities. So we look kind of within the Russell Group and find a relationship, and we also look within the newer universities and find a relationship. And we also find that it matters for both research and teaching. So, it's kind of, it's sort of a universal relationship both across different types of institutions and also across different types of performance outputs that kind of universities might care about.